Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the grand chamber, her voice calm and steady as she addressed the two species who had been killing each other for 30 years. The Torvani delegation sat on her left, their scaled bodies tense with barely controlled rage. The Melori floated on her right, their gas-filled bodies pulsing with angry colors. The border world of Keffor will remain neutral territory, Elena said. Both species will share mining rights equally. A joint commission will oversee all operations. The Torvani ambassador slammed his clawed hand on the table. This is unacceptable. We claimed that world first. Elena did not flinch. She had done this 1,000 times before. You claimed it first, yes, but the Melori established the first permanent settlement. Both claims have merit. Neither has absolute right. This is why we compromise. Behind her, the vast amphitheater of the Galactic Council stretched upward in rings of seats. Representatives from 300 species watched the negotiation. Some were genuinely interested in the outcome. Most were simply entertained by watching the primitive humans play peacemaker. The Melori ambassador pulsed a deep purple color that Elena's translator interpreted as reluctant agreement. The humans speak wisdom. We accept these terms. The Torvani ambassador looked at Elena with something close to hatred, but he also nodded. We accept, but only because the humans have asked it. Elena allowed herself a small smile. The council thanks both delegations for their wisdom. Peace is always the better choice. As the delegations filed out, Elena felt the familiar exhaustion that came after every successful negotiation. 300 years of this. 3 centuries of humanity serving as the galaxy's diplomats, mediators, and peacekeepers. It was important work, noble work, and yet sometimes Elena wondered if anyone actually respected them for it. The answer came quickly enough. As she gathered her documents, she heard the Torvani ambassador speaking to his aide in what he thought was a private voice. Her translator picked up every word. Pathetic creatures, the ambassador said. They have the technology to build warships. They have the population to raise armies. And instead they waste their potential talking. They are the galaxy's servants, nothing more. Useful idiots who clean up messes that real powers create. The aide made a sound of agreement. I have heard that humans do not even teach their children to fight. They have no warriors, no soldiers. Their peacekeeping forces carry no weapons. They are soft, weak. If we wished, we could conquer their colonies in a month. Perhaps someday we will, the ambassador said with a cold laugh. When they have outlived their usefulness. Elena kept her face neutral. She had heard such things many times before. Every human diplomat had. It was the price of the path humanity had chosen. She remembered learning about that choice in school. After the unification wars of the 22nd century, humanity had looked at itself and felt horror. They had spent a century killing each other with weapons of unimaginable destruction. Nuclear fire, engineered plagues, machines designed only to slaughter. By the time peace came, 2 billion humans were dead and the Earth itself was scarred. When humanity finally reached the stars and met other species, they made a collective decision. Never again. They would not carry their violence into the cosmos. They would become something better, something peaceful. The Galactic Council had welcomed them with open arms. A species willing to mediate disputes without seeking advantage. How useful, how convenient. And if the other species privately mocked humanity's choice, well, that was a small price to pay for a clean conscience. Elena made her way through the massive corridors of Nexus Prime, the artificial world that housed the Galactic Council. She nodded politely to passing delegates, answered questions from junior diplomats, and tried to ignore the looks of pity and contempt that followed her. Her personal communicator buzzed. A message from her daughter, Mira, who lived on New Helsinki with her husband and 2 children. Elena smiled at the picture attached to her grandchildren playing in the snow of that distant colony world. Mira was a teacher there, helping to educate the next generation of peaceful humans. Elena was about to reply when every screen in the corridor went red. Emergency broadcast. All channels. She stopped walking. Around her, other delegates paused as well, looking up at the massive displays that lined the walls. The symbol of the Galactic Emergency Network filled every screen. Then the images began. Elena did not understand what she was seeing at first. A planet from orbit. blue and white, beautiful, with 2 small moons. Then flashes of light across the surface, hundreds of them, thousands. The atmosphere itself seemed to catch fire. Text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Attack on human colony world. New Helsinki. Kreth Dominion claims responsibility. Casualty estimates. Total. Elena single quotes as communicators slipped from her fingers and clattered on the floor. New Helsinki. 16 million people. Her daughter. Her grandchildren. Her son-in-law. Everyone. Gone. The images continued. Ships with unfamiliar designs, angular and brutal, firing weapons that turned cities into craters. Ground forces that looked like walking nightmares, hunting down survivors. And through it all, the Kreth symbol, a broken circle dripping with what looked like blood. Elena had heard of the Kreth Dominion. Everyone had. They came from the far edge of the galaxy, a brutal empire that had conquered dozens of species through pure savagery. The Council had discussed them many times, always with the comfortable assumption that they were too far away to matter. Apparently that assumption had been wrong. Round her, alien delegates were reacting with varying degrees of shock and sympathy. Some seemed genuinely horrified. Others looked merely curious, as if watching an interesting documentary. A few, Elena noticed with cold clarity, seemed almost satisfied. The soft, weak humans had finally learned what the universe was really like. Her communicator was buzzing again. She picked it up with numb fingers. The message was from Earth, from the office of the Secretary General herself. Ambassador Vasquez, return to Earth immediately. War Council has been called. The vaults are being opened. Elena stared at those last 5 words. She had heard of the vaults, of course. Every human had, in whispers and rumors. The places where humanity had locked away the weapons and knowledge of their violent past. The sealed tombs of everything they had chosen to forget. 300 years of peace. 300 years of choosing the better path. 300 years of being mocked and dismissed and called weak. And now the vaults were being opened. Elena walked back to the grand chamber. Her steps were steady now, her shock hardening into something else. The Galactic Council was an emergency session, with delegates shouting over each other in a dozen languages. At the center podium, the Council President of Valori, with silver-gray skin, was trying to maintain order. Elena walked to the human delegation's platform. Every eye in the chamber turned to watch her. She knew what they expected. Tears, pleas for help. The soft, weak humans begging the real powers to protect them. Instead, Elena activated her microphone and spoke in a voice as cold as space itself. The United Human Nations formally withdraws from all mediation duties, effective immediately. All human diplomatic staff will be recalled within 72 hours. All human aid missions will be terminated. All human peacekeeping operations will cease. The chamber erupted in confusion. The Council President raised his hands. Ambassador Vasquez, please, this is a time for calm discussion. Discussion is over, Elena said. Humanity has spent 3 centuries talking. We have resolved over 4,000 conflicts. We have prevented at least a dozen wars. We have given everything we have to peace. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to continue. And in return, the Kreth Dominion has murdered 16 million of our people, including my daughter, including my grandchildren. The chamber fell silent. So no, Council President, we will not discuss. We will not negotiate. We will not mediate. Elena gathered her documents and turned to leave. We have remembered what we are. As she walked toward the exit, the elderly Valori ambassador, who had served on the council for over 2 centuries, rose from his seat. His silver skin had gone pale, and his ancient eyes were wide with something Elena had never seen in an alien's face before: fear. Ambassador Vasquez, he called out, his voice trembling. Please, you must tell them. Tell the other species what you were, before you chose peace. Tell them what humanity was. Elena paused at the door. She looked back at the vast chamber full of species who had mocked and dismissed and underestimated humanity for 300 years. You will see soon enough, she said, and she walked out. Behind her, the old Valori turned to his young aide with shaking hands. Begin emergency preparations. Move our civilian populations to the deep shelters. Stockpile food and water for a decade at least. The aide looked confused. Ambassador, the humans are the victims here. Why would we need to prepare? They have no military. They are pacifists. The old Valori shook his head slowly. They were not always pacifists. Before they came to the stars, they nearly destroyed themselves in wars of unimaginable violence. They killed billions of their own kind. They built weapons that could crack planets. They developed plagues that could end species. And then they chose to stop. They locked it all away and chose peace. He looked toward the door where Elena had disappeared. But they did not destroy what they were. They only buried it. And now, gods help us all, they are going to dig it up again. The aides still did not understand. But Ambassador, even if they have old weapons, the Kreth Dominion is one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Surely the humans cannot. You do not understand, the old Valori whispered. The Kreth are brutal. The Kreth are savage. The Kreth are cruel. He closed his ancient eyes. But the humans, when they choose to be, are worse. Far, far worse. And we have just reminded them of that fact in the corridor outside. Elena Vasquez walked toward the shuttle that would carry her home. Her face was calm. Her eyes were dry. But inside her chest, something old and terrible was waking up. Something that humanity had tried very hard to forget. The galaxy had wanted to see what humans were really made of. Now they would find out. Admiral James Okonkwo had spent 40 years serving in the United Human Nations peacekeeping fleet. In all that time, the most dangerous situation he had faced was a reactor malfunction on a transport ship. His fleet had no weapons. His crews had no combat training. Their job was to deliver aid, evacuate refugees, and show the flag of human goodwill across the galaxy. Now he stood in a military shuttle descending through a blizzard toward the Antarctic ice. Below him, hidden beneath 3 kilometers of frozen water, lay something that officially did not exist, the vault. There were 7 of them scattered across human space. 1 on Earth, buried in Antarctica. 1 on Mars, deep in the Vales Marineris. 1 on Titan, for more on humanity's oldest colony worlds. Each one contained the sealed legacy of humanity's violent past. Each one had been locked for 300 years. Until today. The shuttle touched down on a platform that had risen from the ice. Armed guards, actual armed guards. Something Okonkwo had not seen in decades, escorted him to an elevator that plunged downward into darkness. He was not alone. Other officers filled the elevator with him. Some he recognized from the peacekeeping fleet. Others were strangers, old men and women with hard eyes and straight backs. Veterans, he realized. People who remembered the last military exercises 50 years ago. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. The elevator opened onto a vast underground chamber carved from the ice itself. The walls glowed with soft blue light, and the temperature was cold enough that Okonkwo could see his breath. Ahead of him stretched rows upon rows of massive shapes covered in frost-white sheets. Ships. Thousands of ships, sleeping in the ice like ancient monsters waiting to wake. A woman in a white coat approached him. Her name tag read D.R. Sarah CHEN, Vault Administrator. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly, though not from the cold. Admiral Okonkwo, she said, "Welcome to Vault Prime. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "I wish we were not meeting at all," Okonkwo said quietly. "How long will reactivation take?" "The first wave of ships can be flight-ready in 72 hours. Full activation of all vault contents will take approximately 3 weeks." She hesitated. "Admiral, I have to ask, are we really doing this? Are we really going to wake it all up?" Okonkwo looked at the frozen shapes around him. He could make out the curves of weapon systems, the angles of armor plating, the distinctive silhouettes of warships designed for only one purpose. "The Kreth killed 16 million people," he said. "They burned an entire colony to ash, and their fleet is already moving toward New Odessa. So yes, Doctor, we are doing this." Dr. Chen nodded and led him deeper into the vault. As they walked, she explained what they would find. "The ships are the most obvious part of what we stored here. We have approximately 12,000 combat vessels of various classes, from patrol frigates to full dreadnoughts. The largest is the Remembrance, a command ship nearly 3 kilometers long. All of them were built during the Unification Wars and retrofitted for space combat. When we reach the stars, They passed through a security door into another chamber. This one was filled with racks of equipment, armor, weapons, devices that Okonkwo did not recognize. Personal combat equipment, Dr. Chen said. Powered armor suits, directed energy weapons, neural interface combat systems, everything a ground force would need to take and hold territory. Another door, another chamber. This one made Okonkwo stop in his tracks. The walls were lined with sealed containers, each one marked with biohazard symbols and warning labels. In the center of the room stood a single pedestal with a black box on top of it. Biological weapons, Dr. Chen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Designer plagues, targeted genetic weapons, things that could wipe out entire species if released. She pointed to the black box. And that is the Omega Protocol, a self-replicating nanite swarm capable of disassembling matter at the molecular level. We used a prototype once, during the Unification Wars. It destroyed an entire continent before we could stop it. Okonkwo felt sick. We built these things, and then we locked them away because we were horrified by what we had done. Dr. Chen looked at him with tired eyes. The question is, Admiral, are we horrified enough to leave them locked, or are we angry enough to use them? They continued the tour. Okonkwo saw weapons platforms capable of cracking planets open like eggs. He saw stealth ships designed to slip past any defense and deliver payloads of pure destruction. He saw AI systems built for only one purpose: to calculate the most efficient ways to kill enemy forces. But the thing that disturbed him most was the final chamber. It was a simple room, almost like a library. The walls were lined with screens and storage devices. Dr. Chen called it the archive. This is the complete record of human military history, she said. Every war we ever fought, every strategy we ever developed, every atrocity we ever committed. She pulled up a file on one of the screens. The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the campaigns of Alexander the Great, the tactics of Genghis Khan, the blitzkrieg strategies of World War II, the guerrilla operations of the 21st century, the systematic horror of the Unification Wars. Images flashed across the screen. Okonkwo saw ancient battles with swords and spears. He saw trench warfare and nuclear explosions. He saw cities burning and populations fleeing. He saw the worst of what humanity had been. We studied violence for 10,000 years. Dr. Chen said, we perfected it. We turned killing into a science, and then an art, and then we locked it all away because we finally understood what we had become. She turned off the screen. The other species in the galaxy have been fighting for thousands of years. They think they understand war. They think they are warriors. Her voice hardened. They have no idea. They have never seen what happens when humans truly commit to destruction. They play at war the way children play with toys. We turned it into something absolute. Okonkwo stood in silence for a long moment. He thought about his years of peaceful service. He thought about the mocking looks from alien delegates. He thought about New Helsinki burning. He thought about his own grandparents, who had survived the Unification Wars. They never spoke about what they had seen. They never spoke about what they had done. They had simply been grateful that it was over, and they had raised their children to be peaceful, and they had died hoping that humanity would never go back to what it was. Begin reactivation, he said finally. All systems, all ships, all weapons. Dr. Chen nodded. She did not argue. She did not ask if he was sure. She simply walked to a control panel and entered a code that had not been used in 300 years. Throughout the vault, lights began to flicker on. Frost began to crack and fall from the sleeping ships. Automated systems hummed to life. The ancient machines of war stirred in their frozen tombs. And across human space, the same scene was playing out in the other 6 vaults. On Mars and Titan, on colony worlds that had never known violence. Everywhere, humanity was remembering what it had tried so hard to forget. Okonkwo watched as the first ship emerged from its icy cocoon. It was the Remembrance, the flagship of the human fleet. 3 kilometers of armor and weapons, designed by engineers who had devoted their lives to the science of death. On its hull, barely visible beneath centuries of frost, was the symbol of the old human military, a closed fist surrounded by stars. Admiral, said a young officer who had accompanied him into the vault. "There's something else you should see." She led him to a smaller chamber off the main hall. Inside, Okonkwo found racks of uniforms, military uniforms, black and gray, with insignia he did not recognize. "Standard combat uniforms for all ranks," the officer said. They were preserved along with everything else. Okonkwo reached out and touched the fabric. It was cold and stiff, but perfectly preserved. He found a uniform in his size and held it up. It felt wrong in his hands. Heavy, serious, real. "Sir," the young officer said hesitantly, "I joined the peacekeeping fleet because I believed in what humanity had become. I believed in peace. I believed in diplomacy. I believed we were better than violence." She was crying, Okonkwo realized. Tears were freezing on her cheeks in the cold air of the vault. "I still believe those things," she continued. "But I also saw the images from New Helsinki. I saw what the Kreth did to our people. And I think," she paused, struggling with the words, "I think maybe sometimes you have to become something terrible to protect the people you love." Okonkwo looked at the uniform in his hands. He thought about the peaceful path humanity had walked for 3 centuries. He thought about the mocking aliens who called them weak. He thought about his peaceful grandchildren who would never understand what he was about to become. Then he put on the uniform. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. "Send a message to all vault sites," he said, his voice steady now. "Full activation. All personnel report for duty. And send a message to the Galactic Council." "What should the message say, sir?" Okonkwo walked toward the remembrance, where crews were already beginning the startup procedures. Behind him, the whole vault was coming alive with activity. 300 years of sleep were ending. "Tell them that the humans are awake now," he said. "And tell them to get out of our way." Above them, the Antarctic ice began to crack as something massive began to rise toward the surface. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but they would learn. They would all learn. Councillor Vethora of the Torvani Empire had dismissed humanity as irrelevant for her entire political career. The soft, peaceful creatures were useful for settling disputes, nothing more. They had no real power. They had no teeth. So when the reports began coming in, she assumed they were false. Human warships. She laughed at her aide. "The humans have cargo vessels and passenger transports. They do not have warships. Councillor, the reports are confirmed. Human diplomatic missions are being evacuated from over 300 worlds. Human merchant fleets are returning to soul space. And something is rising from the Antarctic region of Earth." The aide hesitated. "Something very large." Vethora dismissed the concern with a wave of her clawed hand. "Even if the humans have hidden a few old weapons somewhere, what does it matter? The Kreth Dominion has one of the largest fleets in the galaxy. The humans cannot possibly match them." But over the next several days, Vethora began to worry. The first sign was the silence. Human communications, which had filled diplomatic channels for centuries, went quiet. Human ambassadors stopped attending council sessions. Human aid workers disappeared from disaster zones. It was as if the entire species had simply withdrawn from galactic affairs. The second sign was the Valori, Ambassador Kethvalium. The ancient Valori, who had served on the council for 2 centuries, was usually a calm and steady presence. Now he walked the corridors of Nexus Prime with fear in his silver eyes. He had begun gathering records, old records, about humanity's past before they came to the stars. Vethora cornered him one evening in a quiet corridor. "Ambassador, you seem disturbed. What do you know about the humans that the rest of us do not?" The old Valori looked at her for a long moment. Then he activated a holographic display and showed her images that made her scales turn pale. Cities burning, mushroom clouds rising over landscapes, mass graves stretching to the horizon, soldiers in primitive armor cutting down enemy forces with brutal efficiency. And through it all, humans. Humans building weapons, humans giving orders, humans destroying everything in their path. "This is their history," Kethvalium said quietly. "Before they came to the stars, they fought wars of such violence that their own planet was nearly destroyed. They killed billions of their own kind. They developed weapons capable of destroying worlds. And then, when it was over, they looked at what they had done and felt such horror that they locked it all away. They chose to become peaceful. They chose to be diplomats instead of warriors. Vethora studied the images with growing unease. But these are primitive weapons, crude technology. Surely they could not compete with modern military forces? You missed the point, Kef Volume said. The weapons do not matter. What matters is the mind that created them. The humans did not stumble into violence by accident. They studied it. They perfected it. They spent 10,000 years turning warfare into a science. Every battle, every strategy, every terrible weapon was the product of deliberate research and refinement. He turned off the display when the humans joined the galactic community. They were advanced enough to build warships capable of matching any power in the galaxy. They chose not to. They chose peace. But the knowledge is still there. The capacity is still there. And now the Kreth have given them a reason to use it. Vethora was about to respond when an alert flashed across every screen in the corridor. Emergency broadcast. Second Kreth attack in progress. Target: Human Colony New Odessa. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within the hour. Delegates from every major species crowded into the Grand Chamber, their voices rising in a chaos of different languages. The Kreth are testing the human. Response: someone shouted. They are trying to force a quick surrender. Another argued. The humans have no fleet. They cannot possibly defend themselves. But the old Valori ambassador sat in silence, watching the tactical display that showed the Kreth fleet closing in on New Odessa. 67 warships, including 3 heavy cruisers, more than enough to destroy an undefended colony. And then the sensors detected something else. A single ship emerging from hyperspace between the Kreth fleet and New Odessa. The ship was massive, over 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that no one in the chamber recognized. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, and it moved with the smooth precision of a predator closing in on prey. What is that? The council president demanded. The Valori ambassador closed his ancient eyes. That is the humans remembering what they are. In the tactical display, the Kreth fleet commander was broadcasting a message to the strange new ship. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. You are interfering with a military operation of the Kreth Dominion. Stand aside or be destroyed. For a long moment, there was no response. The single human ship simply hung in space, directly in the path of the Kreth fleet. Then a voice came through the communication channel. It was calm, steady, and utterly without fear. This is the UH and Mercy's end. United Human Nations Navy, you have attacked our people. You have murdered our families. You have 16 million dead to answer for. The voice paused. This is your only warning. Turn back now or face the consequences. The Kreth commander laughed. The sound echoed through the Grand Chamber as delegates watched the confrontation in growing tension. One ship. You bring one ship against 67? You humans are even more foolish than we thought. All vessels, attack formation. Destroy them. The Kreth fleet surged forward. Weapons charged. Targeting systems locked on to the single human vessel. And then the human ship opened fire. Vethora had seen many battles in her career. The Torvani were warriors, after all. She understood combat. She understood violence. But she had never seen anything like what happened next. The Mercy's End did not fight like a normal warship. It fought like a dancer, spinning and weaving through enemy fire while its own weapons struck with impossible precision. Each shot found its target. Each target exploded into debris. The Kreth ships tried to respond, tried to coordinate, tried to bring their superior numbers to bear, but the human vessel was always one step ahead. 3 Kreth ships died in the first 10 seconds, 7 more in the next 10. By the time a minute had passed, nearly half the Kreth fleet was burning wreckage. The Kreth commander, aboard one of the heavy cruisers, was screaming orders that his fleet could not follow. How are they doing this? How are they predicting our movements? All ships, fall back, fall back. But it was too late. The Mercy's End was among them now, a shark in a school of fish. Its weapons never stopped firing. Its shields absorbed everything the Kreth could throw at it. And one by one, the ships of the Kreth fleet died. The battle lasted for minutes. At the end, only debris remained. 67 Kreth warships, the pride of the Dominion, reduced to floating wreckage by a single human vessel. In the Grand Chamber, There was absolute silence. Delegates who had mocked humanity for centuries stared at the tactical display with expressions of shock and terror. Even the Torvani, the proudest warriors in the galaxy, had gone pale. The human ship moved slowly through the debris field, as if surveying its work. Then a new transmission filled the chamber. "This is Admiral James Okonkwo, United Human Nations Navy. The Kreth Dominion has committed an act of genocide against our people. This cannot go unanswered." On the display, a star map appeared. A single point was highlighted: the Kreth homeworld, far on the edge of the galaxy. In 14 standard days, the human fleet will arrive at the Kreth homeworld. We will demand the unconditional surrender of the Kreth Dominion. If that surrender is not forthcoming, the Admiral's voice hardened. If that surrender is not forthcoming, the Kreth people will face the consequences of their government's actions. The transmission paused. To the other members of the Galactic Council, we offer this message. Humanity has no quarrel with any other species. We wish only to pursue justice for our murdered citizens. Any species that does not interfere with our operations will have nothing to fear from us. Another pause. But make no mistake, the Mercy's end was one ship. We have 10,000 more. Many of them are larger. Many of them are more heavily armed. And all of them are crewed by humans who remember what we are capable of. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, the old Valori ambassador rose from his seat. His silver face was grim as he addressed the chamber. 300 years ago, humanity chose peace. They locked away their weapons and their knowledge, and they tried to become something better. For 3 centuries, we have mocked them for that choice. We have called them weak. We have called them cowards. We have treated them as servants. He looked around at the terrified faces of his colleagues. Now we know the truth. They were never weak. They were never cowards. They simply chose not to destroy. And the Kreth, in their arrogance, have reminded them that destruction is always an option. He walked toward the exit, his ancient body suddenly seeming very tired. Gods help the Kreth. Gods help us all. Because humanity is awake now, and I do not think they will go back to sleep. Outside the chamber, the stars continued to shine as they always had. But something had changed. The galaxy would never be the same. The transformation of human space took exactly 21 days. It would have taken any other species years, perhaps decades, to convert a peaceful civilization into a war machine. Humanity did it in 3 weeks, on Earth. Factories that had produced consumer goods and medical equipment began producing weapons and ammunition. The shift happened with frightening efficiency. Workers who had spent their lives making things to help people now made things to kill people. And they did not complain. They simply worked harder, longer, with a cold focus that unnerved even themselves. On Mars, shipyards that had built cargo vessels and passenger transports began building warships. The designs came from the vaults, plans that had been sealed for 3 centuries. Engineers studied them and understood them almost immediately. The knowledge of destruction, it seemed, had not been forgotten. It had only been sleeping. On colony worlds across human space, civilians began training. Not military training exactly, there was no time for that. But humans learned how to shoot weapons, how to take cover, how to coordinate in groups. Old veterans, men and women who remembered the last military exercises from 50 years ago, emerged from retirement to teach the young. The galaxy watched with growing horror. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now serving as a civilian advisor aboard the flagship Remembrance, watched the transformation from close range. She stood on the observation deck of Admiral Okonkwo's command ship as it led a fleet of 2,000 vessels toward Kreth space. 2,000 ships. And this was just the first wave. "You have been quiet," Ambassador Okonkwo said, joining her at the window. He wore the black and gray uniform of the human military now, with Admiral's insignia on his collar. He looked different than she remembered, harder, colder. "I am trying to understand what we have become," Elena said softly. 3 weeks ago, we were the galaxy's peacemakers. Now we are its destroyers. Okonkwo was silent for a moment. "We are what we have always been. We simply hid it for a long time." The fleet moved through hyperspace toward the first Kreth-controlled system. Elena had studied the battle plan. The human forces would hit Kreth military installations first, crippling their ability to resist. Then they would move toward the home world, sweeping aside any opposition. The plan was efficient, brutal, and very, very human. "Admiral," a tactical officer called out. "We are approaching the Keth 7 system. Kreth defensive fleet detected. Approximately 200 vessels." Okonkwo nodded. "Standard approach. Carrier groups Alpha through Delta will engage the main fleet. Strike groups will target orbital installations. Ground forces will secure the surface." Elena watched as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Kreth defenders moved to intercept, their ships forming battle lines that had worked against every enemy they had ever faced. Against the humans, those formations lasted less than 10 minutes. The human ships did not fight the way other species fought. They did not line up and exchange fire like honorable warriors. They used deception, misdirection, and overwhelming force applied at precisely the right moment. Flanking attacks split the Kreth fleet into isolated groups. Electronic warfare blinded their sensors, and when the Kreth tried to retreat, human strike groups were already behind them, cutting off their escape. Elena had seen the reports from the Battle of New Odessa, but watching it happen in real time was different. The humans moved with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. Every ship knew exactly where to be. Every captain knew exactly when to strike. 3 centuries of peace had not dimmed their understanding of war. If anything, it had refined it. When the battle ended, the entire Kreth defense fleet had been destroyed. Human losses were minimal: a few damaged ships, a handful of casualties. The ground assault went even faster. Human marines dropped from orbit in armored pods, landing directly on top of Kreth military installations. They moved through the enemy positions with terrifying efficiency, using tactics that seemed to anticipate every Kreth response. Within 6 hours, the Keth 7 system belonged to humanity, and then the fleet moved on to the next system, and the next. Elena watched it all from the observation deck. Day after day, battle after battle, the Kreth Dominion had conquered dozens of species over centuries of brutal expansion. Against the awakened humans, their entire military crumbled in weeks. The worst part, Elena thought, was how easy it was. The humans were not struggling. They were not sacrificing. They were simply dismantling the Kreth war machine with the same calm efficiency they had once used to negotiate trade agreements. On the 5th day, Admiral Okonkwo received a message from the Kreth Emperor. It was an offer of negotiation. Terms could be discussed. Compromises could be made. Okonkwo read the message in front of his senior staff. Then he deleted it. "No negotiations," he said. "Not until we reach the home world. Not until they understand what they have done." Elena wanted to object. This was wrong. This was not who humanity was supposed to be. But when she looked around the command center, she saw faces set in cold determination. These people had lost family on New Helsinki. These people had watched 16 million of their fellow humans die. They would not stop until justice was done. And what was justice? Elena was no longer sure. On the 8th day, the fleet reached the edge of the Kreth home system. The Kreth Emperor sent another message, more desperate this time. He offered to surrender any territory. He offered to pay any reparations. He offered to punish any officials responsible for the attack on New Helsinki. Again, Okonkwo deleted the message. "Admiral," Elena said finally, unable to stay silent any longer, "we have won. The Kreth cannot resist us. Why must we continue to the home world?" Okonkwo turned to look at her. His eyes were flat, empty of the warmth she remembered. "Because they need to understand," he said. "They need to see what happens when you attack humanity. They need to feel the fear that our people felt on New Helsinki. And more importantly," he looked out the window at the approaching Kreth homeworld, "the rest of the galaxy needs to see it too." The human fleet entered the Kreth home system on the 9th day. The Kreth had gathered every remaining ship. They had nearly 1,000 vessels for a final defense. It was the largest fleet they had ever assembled. Against any other enemy, it would have been overwhelming. Against the humans, it lasted 2 hours. Elena watched the battle with growing horror. The Kreth fought desperately, knowing they were defending their homes, their families, everything they had. But the humans cut through them like a blade through paper. Ship after ship exploded into debris. Squadron after squadron was eliminated with cold precision. When it was over, the Kreth homeworld lay naked before the human fleet. 10 billion Kreth looked up at the sky and saw their doom descending. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the command deck of the Remembrance, looking down at the planet that had murdered 16 million of his people. His finger hovered over the control that would authorize the planet crackers to fire. One command. That was all it would take. One command, and the Kreth homeworld would cease to exist. Elena stood behind him, her heart pounding. "James," she said softly, using his first name for the first time since she had known him. "Is this who we are now?" Okonkwo did not answer. His finger remained over the control. Around them, the bridge crew watched in silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The fate of 10 billion lives hung on the decision of one man. "They killed my grandchildren," Okonkwo said, his voice barely audible. "They burned my family alive. They laughed while they did it." "I know," Elena said. "I lost my family too. I want them to pay. But genocide." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the planet below. "If we do this, we become the very thing we buried in the ice. We become the monsters we tried so hard to stop being." Okonkwo's hand trembled. On the planet below, 10 billion Kreth waited for their extinction. "They would have done the same to us," he said. "Yes," Elena agreed. "They would have. That is why they are monsters. The question is whether we want to be monsters too." The fleet held position. The weapons remained charged, and the Admiral's finger remained over the control that would end a species. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Okonkwo spoke. "Open a channel to the Kreth government." The communications officer complied. A moment later, the terrified face of the Kreth Emperor appeared on the screen. He was an ancient creature, his scales gray with age, his eyes wide with fear. "This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Human Nations," the Admiral said. His voice was steady, controlled, utterly without emotion. "Your fleet has been destroyed. Your military has been eliminated. Your empire has fallen. You are completely at our mercy." The Kreth Emperor fell to his knees on the screen. "We surrender. We surrender unconditionally. Please, please do not destroy us. We will do anything. We will accept any terms." Okonkwo stared at him for a long moment. "Anything, anything. Just spare our people. Spare our world." The Admiral removed his finger from the weapon's control. Elena felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Then listen carefully," Okonkwo said, "because I am only going to say this once." He began to list the terms of surrender, and the galaxy, watching through 1,000 different channels, began to understand something important. Humanity had chosen not to destroy the Kreth, but that choice could be changed at any moment, and the species that had mocked humanity for centuries suddenly realized that the peacemakers they had dismissed were, in fact, the most dangerous force in the cosmos. They had simply chosen, for 300 years, to be gentle. Now everyone understood what that choice really meant. The terms of the Kreth surrender were broadcast across the galaxy. The Kreth dominion would be dissolved. All conquered territories would be freed. All military assets would be destroyed. The leaders who had ordered the attack on New Helsinki would face trial for crimes against sentient beings. The Kreth people would pay reparations for 3 generations, rebuilding what they had destroyed. It was harsh. It was humiliating. And it was not genocide. Admiral Okonkwo had made his choice. The planet crackers remained silent. 10 billion Kreth would live to see another day. But across human space, not everyone was satisfied. Elena Vasquez watched the broadcasts from Earth with a heavy heart. Protests filled the streets of major cities. Crowds demanded blood. 16 million dead, they shouted. 16 million innocents burned alive. And the Kreth would simply pay money and hand over a few leaders? Where was the justice in that? "They want extinction," she said quietly to Okonkwo. They stood together on the bridge of the Remembrance, watching the feeds from home. "They want us to finish what we started." Okonkwo nodded. "I know. I wanted the same thing. I had my finger on the button, ready to end them all." He turned away from the screens. "But then I remembered something my grandmother told me. A long time ago." Elena waited. "She survived the unification wars," Okonkwo continued. "She was a soldier. She did things she never talked about. But once, when I was very young, She told me why humanity chose peace. It was not because we were weak. It was not because we were afraid. It was because we finally understood something important. What? That anyone can destroy. Destruction is easy. A child with a match can burn down a forest. A fool with a weapon can kill 100 people. His voice grew soft. But creation is hard. Building is hard. Choosing not to destroy when you have the power to destroy, that is the hardest thing of all. He looked back at the image of the Kreth homeworld, still visible through the bridge windows. If we had destroyed them, we would have proven that we learned nothing from our own history. We would have become the monsters we buried in the ice. And in 100 years, another species would attack us, and we would destroy them too. And again, until there was nothing left but humans and corpses. Elena understood. The rage was still there. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in her own heart. But he had chosen to be more than his rage. The galaxy is watching, he said. Every species that ever mocked us, ever dismissed us, ever called us weak, they are all watching to see what humanity does with absolute power. And I want them to see something that terrifies them even more than genocide. What? Mercy, Okonkwo said. I want them to see that we have the power to destroy everything, and we choose not to. That is what truly powerful species do. They choose restraint. They choose wisdom. They choose to build instead of burn. He walked toward the exit of the bridge. Signal the fleet. We are going home. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. During that time, the Kreth began the painful process of surrender. Human observers arrived to oversee the trials of military leaders. Human ships supervised the destruction of Kreth weapons. Human diplomats began the complex work of freeing the species that the Kreth had conquered. It was not revenge. It was justice. And slowly, reluctantly, the anger of the human people began to cool. Elena traveled back to Nexus Prime, to the Galactic Council. She had been away for almost 2 months, and she was not sure what kind of reception she would receive. She should not have worried. When she entered the Grand Chamber, every delegate rose to their feet, not in protest, not in anger, in respect. The council president, a Valori who had replaced the aging Keth Volume, approached her with formal greetings. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome your return, and I offer our profound respect for the restraint your species has shown. Elena was confused. Restraint. We destroyed the Kreth military. We conquered their homeworld. We dictated terms of surrender. Yes, the president agreed. And then you stopped. You had the power to eliminate an entire species, and you chose mercy instead. Do you have any idea how rare that is? She gestured to the assembled delegates. Most of us here have ancestors who would have chosen destruction. Most of us have histories of genocide and extinction. But humanity, with absolute power in your hands, chose to rebuild instead of destroy. The old Valori ambassador, Kethval, approached with slow, careful steps. He looked at Elena with something like wonder. For 300 years, he said, we thought humanity chose peace because you were too weak for war. We were fools. You chose peace because you understood something we did not. You understood that true strength is not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose when not to. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. We almost did not choose mercy. We came very close to becoming the monsters we once were, but you did not, Keth Volume said. And that is what matters. In the months that followed, things changed across the galaxy. Human diplomats returned to their posts, but they were treated differently now, with respect, with caution, with genuine appreciation. The species that had once mocked them now listened carefully to their advice. The powers that had once dismissed them now sought their mediation with earnest requests. The vaults on Earth and across human space were sealed again. The warships returned to their frozen tombs. The weapons were put back in storage. Humanity went back to being peacekeepers and mediators. But everyone knew the truth now. Everyone understood what lay beneath the surface of human kindness. Elena returned to her duties at the Galactic Council. One day, a young alien delegate newly arrived and eager to learn asked her a question that she had been asked many times before. Ambassador Vasquez, I have studied human history. I have seen records of your wars, your weapons, your terrible capacity for violence. And yet here you are, peacefully resolving disputes, helping strangers, building instead of destroying. The young delegate leaned forward. Why did humanity choose peace when you could have ruled through fear? Elena smiled. It was the same question she had been asked on the day she left the council, when everything began. Now, finally, she had an answer. Let me tell you something about my species, she said. We are not born peaceful. We are not naturally gentle. Inside every human is the capacity for terrible violence. We carry 10,000 years of warfare in our blood. We know how to kill more efficiently than any species in the galaxy. The young delegate looked disturbed. But that is exactly why we chose peace, Elena continued. Because we know what we are capable of. Because we have seen the destruction we can cause. Because we looked at the ashes of our own history and said never again. Peace is not our weakness. It is our greatest act of strength. She stood and walked to the window of the chamber, looking out at the stars. Any species can wage war. Any species can destroy. It takes no special virtue to burn and kill, but to choose mercy when you have the power to destroy to build, when you could burn to forgive, when you could take revenge. That requires something more. That requires wisdom. That requires strength. That requires becoming more than the violence inside you. She turned back to the young delegate. Humanity chose peace not because we could not fight, but because we knew what fighting would cost. We locked away our weapons not out of fear, but out of love for what we could become instead of what we had been. The young delegate nodded slowly, beginning to understand. And now, she asked, now that everyone knows what humanity is truly capable of. Elena smiled again, a sad and knowing smile. Now they understand the truth. Our gentleness is a choice, and choices can be changed. But we truly hope that we will never have to change it again. She returned to her seat, where a new dispute awaited mediation. Somewhere out there, two species were threatening war over a territorial disagreement. They needed humans to help them find peace. And humanity, as always, was ready to help. Behind them, locked in vaults of ice and silence, the weapons of destruction waited patiently. Humanity hoped they would never be needed again. But if some new enemy rose to threaten the innocent, the galaxy now knew exactly what would happen. Humanity would remember what it was, and the galaxy would learn, once again, why peace was always the better choice, because the alternative was something that even the stars themselves would fear.